she slapped him, right there, in front of everyone. The sound cut through the hum of jet engines like a gunshot. Every head turned, every conversation died. 47 passengers watched a flight attendant's hand connect with the face of a quiet black man sitting by the window, a man who had done nothing but try to protect his 8-year-old daughter from a broken seat. He didn't yell, he didn't raise a fist. He just looked down at his little girl with the steadiest eyes you've ever seen. And 2 minutes later, the entire cabin discovered exactly who they had just watched get slapped. Drop a comment below with your city. Let me see how far this story travels. And if you believe in dignity over judgment, subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The slap happened at 11:14 in the morning, somewhere over the border between Georgia and Tennessee, at 32,000 feet. Nobody on Flight 728 from Atlanta to Seattle was expecting it. Not the retired schoolteacher in 14C who was already half asleep. Not the two businessmen in first class who were arguing quietly about quarterly projections. Not the young mother 3 rows back who was trying to keep her toddler occupied with crackers and a coloring book. Nobody was expecting it, but it happened. And the sound of it, that single, sharp crack of a palm against a man's cheekbone, traveled from row 12 all the way to the back galley and bounced off every overhead compartment in between. It wasn't loud the way thunder is loud. It was loud the way a breaking bone is loud. Intimate, wrong. The kind of sound the human ear recognizes immediately as something that should not exist. The man who got slapped was named Daniel Brooks. He was 38 years old. He was black. He was traveling alone with his daughter. And in the 10 seconds after that slap landed, he did something that nobody on that airplane, not a single one of those 47 passengers, could have predicted. He said nothing. He turned his head slowly back toward the window. He reached out and placed one large, steady hand on his daughter's knee. And he breathed, just breathed, the way a man breathes when he is fighting something enormous from the inside and refuses to let it out. That was the moment that changed everything. But to understand why that moment mattered, to understand why the cabin went completely, utterly, spine-straighteningly silent. 2 minutes later, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to start with a broken seat screen. Daniel had almost not taken this flight. 3 days earlier, he'd been sitting at the kitchen table in his apartment in Atlanta's West End neighborhood, staring at 2 plane tickets on his laptop screen. One was for Flight 728, non-stop to Seattle, departing at 9:45 a.m. The other was a cheaper option with a connection through Denver, adding 4 hours to the trip. He'd been chewing on the eraser end of a pencil, a habit Olivia had been trying to break him of for the better part of a year, and doing the math in his head. Daddy, Olivia had said from across the table, without looking up from her homework, "You're chewing the pencil again." "I know. Mrs. Patterson says it's a nervous habit." Mrs. Patterson is probably right. "So what are you nervous about?" He'd looked up at her then. She was sitting cross-legged on her chair, with her math workbook open in front of her, but her eyes were on him. 8 years old, with her mother's forehead and her grandmother's mouth and eyes that had always seemed to Daniel like they were about 30 years older than the rest of her. "I'm not nervous," he'd said. "I'm calculating. What's the difference?" He'd smiled. "About $40 and 4 hours. She'd looked at the laptop screen with the particular focus she got when she was solving a real problem. "The faster one costs more but saves time," she said. "Time is worth more than money, Dad. You always say that." "I do always say that. So get the fast one." He'd bought the tickets. That was 3 days ago. Now, at 11:08 a.m., Daniel Brooks and his daughter Olivia were seated in row 12 of Flight 728, and the world was still calm. Olivia had the window seat. Daniel was in the middle. The aisle seat was occupied by a man named Gerald Hoffman, a 60-something sales consultant from Charlotte, who had fallen asleep before they'd even finished taxiing. Olivia had her small backpack on her lap, and she was organizing it the way she always organized things, with a particular seriousness that Daniel found both hilarious and deeply touching. Each item was taken out, examined, and placed back in a specific order. Pencils first, then her reading book, then the small pouch with her colored markers. Then the 2 granola bars Daniel had packed for her, which she always saved for emergencies and never actually ate. "You know those granola bars are going to expire before you eat them," Daniel said quietly. "They're emergency granola bars, Dad. You don't eat emergency food unless it's an emergency. And what counts as an emergency at 30,000 feet?" She considered this with total seriousness. If they run out of pretzels. He laughed, actually laughed. A real laugh, the kind that loosened something in his chest that had been tight for a very long time. The kind of laugh you only get from 8-year-olds who are completely, devastatingly sincere. It was, he would think later, the last moment of uncomplicated peace he had on that flight. The problem started with the seat screen. Olivia leaned forward to turn on the entertainment system mounted in the seat back in front of her, and the screen flickered twice, displayed a pixelated burst of color, and went dark. She pressed the button again. Nothing. She looked at her father. "It's broken," she said, with the calm matter-of-factness of someone who has encountered broken things before. "Let me see." Daniel leaned forward and pressed the power button. Held it. The screen didn't respond. He could see a small crack running along the lower left edge of the display casing. Not something that had just happened. Something that had been there for a while, covered up poorly with a piece of tape that had since peeled halfway off. He pressed the call button for the flight attendant. Victoria Lane arrived 60 seconds later. She was 29, with dark hair pulled back tight, a uniform that was pressed to geometric precision, and an expression that Daniel would later struggle to describe, not unfriendly. Exactly, but guarded. The kind of expression that comes from someone who has spent years being evaluated on their performance and has started evaluating everyone else, right back, automatically, the moment they lay eyes on them. She looked at Daniel first, then at Olivia, then at the seat screen. "What seems to be the problem? The screen's broken," Daniel said. He kept his voice even and pleasant. "You can see the crack on the casing there. My daughter was looking forward to. Sir, the entertainment systems are not guaranteed on every flight." Daniel paused. "I understand that. I'm not complaining about a technical issue. I'm pointing out that the screen is physically damaged. That crack was there before we boarded. I just want to make sure it's documented so we're not held responsible for it." Victoria's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. Something behind her eyes rearranged itself. "Are you suggesting the airline damaged your seat?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact. The screen casing is cracked. I'd like someone to note that. I can have someone look at it after we land." "That's fine, but my daughter would also like to." "There are no open seats available to move to, sir." Daniel stopped. He hadn't asked to move. He looked at Victoria carefully. "I didn't ask about moving." A beat of silence. "Most passengers in this situation ask about moving," Victoria said. "I'm not most passengers." Something about the way he said it, quiet, direct, with no edge of aggression but no yielding either, seemed to land wrong with Victoria. Daniel would wonder about this later. He would wonder if she had heard something in those words that he hadn't intended. Or if she had simply already decided, somewhere in the first 5 seconds of looking at him, who he was and what he wanted, and how this conversation was going to go. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice," Daniel blinked. "I'm not raising my voice. You're creating a disturbance." The man in the aisle seat, Gerald Hoffman, stirred in his sleep. A woman in the row behind them, Daniel hadn't caught her name, mid-40s, reading a paperback, lowered her book slightly. "I am speaking at a normal conversational volume," Daniel said. He was aware of Olivia beside him, very still, watching. He kept his own voice measured. "I would like my daughter's broken screen documented. And I would like to know if there's any alternative entertainment available for her during the flight. That's the whole conversation. I'll see what I can do," Victoria said, and the words came out clipped, dismissive, the verbal equivalent of being shown a door. She started to turn away. "Excuse me," Daniel said. She stopped. "You didn't take a note." Victoria turned back. Her jaw was tight. "I'll remember, ma'am. With respect, I've watched you handle 6 other passengers since we boarded. You're managing a full flight. I would feel better if there was a written record, because I don't want." "Are you calling me incompetent?" The word hit the air like a stone. Daniel heard it land. He felt the shift in the cabin around him, the subtle but unmistakable change in ambient attention, that particular quality of silence that means people have stopped pretending not to listen. "No," he said carefully, "I am not calling you anything. I'm asking for documentation of existing damage to airline property." "That's a reasonable request. I heard what you said." "I don't think you did." The woman with the paperback had put the book completely down now. Gerald Hoffman was awake, though he was doing his best to appear otherwise. 2 rows up, a man in a business suit had turned his head, at a careful 15-degree angle, the universal posture of someone watching out of their peripheral vision while pretending to look at their phone. "Sir," Victoria said, and her voice had dropped into a register that was very controlled and very cold. "I need you to stop speaking to me in that tone." "What tone?" Daniel asked, and there was genuine confusion in it, not performed confusion, not sarcasm, but real bewilderment, because he had been, by every measure he could apply, speaking with complete civility. He was aware of his own voice. He had always been aware of his own voice, in every room, on every airplane, in every situation where awareness of his own voice was necessary. He had been speaking quietly, he had been speaking politely. He had been, by any objective standard, a model of reasonable restraint. "The tone," Victoria said, "where you speak to me like you know better." The silence in the cabin was different now, denser. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Is that what you think this is?" he said quietly. And Victoria Lane slapped him. It happened fast the way violent things always happen fast. Faster than the brain can track, faster than the body can respond. Her right hand came up and connected with the left side of his face, with enough force to snap his head to the side. The sound was, there's no other word for it, wrong. Anatomically, fundamentally wrong. The kind of sound that the human nervous system is hardwired to respond to with immediate, full-body alarm. Every person within earshot felt it in their stomach. The cabin froze. Not dramatically, not all at once, it was more like a wave moving through the rows, each cluster of passengers going still as the sound reached them, conversations dying, heads turning. The collective consciousness of the aircraft, zeroing in on row 12, with the focused, distinct attention of a creature that has just heard a predator. Victoria stood there with her hand still raised, and Daniel sat very still for 2 seconds that felt like 2 minutes. Then slowly he turned his head, not toward Victoria, not toward the watching passengers, toward Olivia. Olivia was frozen in the window seat, with her backpack half open in her lap, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. She was looking at her father's face with an expression that Daniel recognized as the one she got when something had happened, that she didn't have a category for yet. He put his hand on her knee. "You okay?" he said. She didn't answer right away. "Livy." His voice was soft, steady, the voice he had used with her when she was an infant in a hospital bed and the world was coming apart around them. "Look at me, you okay?" She looked at him. "Dad, I know." He squeezed her knee once. "I know, you're okay?" She nodded, very slowly. He turned back to the cabin. To Victoria, who was still standing there, her hand now lowered, her face cycling through an extraordinary sequence of expressions: shock, defiance, uncertainty, something that might have been fear in rapid, uncontrolled succession. He looked at her and he said, "I'm not worried about what happened to me." His voice was so quiet that the people 3 rows back had to lean forward slightly to hear him. "I'm worried about what my daughter just learned from watching it." No one laughed, no one moved. The businessmen in first class were silent. The mother with the toddler had stopped the cracker and coloring book routine entirely, holding her child against her chest and staring. Gerald Hoffman was fully awake now, sitting ramrod straight in the aisle seat, staring at the side of Daniel's face, with an expression of horrified recognition, the expression of a man seeing something that he knows he has walked past 1,000 times without seeing. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. She started. "You should probably document this," Daniel said, still quiet. "Still level, since we're documenting things." And he turned back to Olivia and said, "Let's get your markers out, okay? You can draw while we fly." And that precise moment of a father choosing to give his daughter colored markers, instead of righteous anger, was when the woman with the paperback started crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears, the kind you get when something hits a nerve you didn't know was exposed. What just happened? Gerald Hoffman was whispering to Daniel. The aircraft had settled back into its ambient noise, the recycled air, the engine hum, the soft creak of the fuselage at altitude, but the cabin's attention had not moved on. It had simply gone underground, running beneath every surface conversation, like an electrical current. "Nothing I can't handle," Daniel said, without looking up from the sketchpad he'd pulled from the seat pocket for Olivia. "That woman I know what she did. Are you going to No, Hoffman was quiet for a moment then. "You're not going to do anything?" Daniel looked at him then. Hoffman was a big man, broad-shouldered, red-faced, the kind of man who had probably spent his whole life being the loudest voice in any room he entered. He was looking at Daniel with something complicated on his face. Confusion. And something underneath the confusion that might have been respect, trying to figure out if it had permission to exist. "What would you like me to do?" Daniel asked. Hoffman opened his mouth and closed it. "Exactly," Daniel said. He handed Olivia a green marker. "Can I draw the clouds?" she asked. "You can draw whatever you want." She leaned toward the window. "The clouds look like a dog today." "What kind of dog?" "A big fluffy one, like the Hendersons' dog." "Bernie?" "Bernie," she nodded seriously. "Bernie the cloud." He watched her draw for a moment, this child, who had every reason to be frightened, and was instead making art, and he felt something in his throat that he didn't want to name. In the forward galley, Victoria Lane was standing with her back against the counter, her arms crossed, her face a careful blank. Her colleague, a flight attendant, named Sandra Park, who had been with the airline for 11 years, was standing across from her with an expression that Victoria had learned, over the course of 2 years working together, meant that Sandra was choosing her words with extraordinary care. "Victoria," Sandra said, "I don't want to hear it. I'm not going to say what you think I'm going to say. You're going to tell me I overreacted. I'm going to tell you," Sandra said carefully, "that there is a video." Victoria's arms tightened across her chest. "At least 3 passengers have their phones out," Sandra continued. "I saw 2 of them with the camera already rolling before it." She stopped. "Before, he was being confrontational," Sandra said nothing. "He was escalating the situation." Sandra said nothing. "Sandra, I heard you. Don't look at me like that." "I'm not looking at you like anything." But Sandra uncrossed her own arms and turned slightly, looking out the small porthole above the galley counter. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. "I need you to think very carefully about what happens next. Not because of the video, because of that little girl who watched it happen." Victoria said nothing. She looked at her dad the way kids look when they don't understand why the world works the way it does, Sandra said. And her dad told her he was okay, while his face was still red. The galley was quiet. "I need to check on the rear cart," Victoria said finally. "Victoria, I need to check on the rear cart." In the cockpit, Captain Michael Hayes was listening to his first officer, a man named Rodriguez who was 29 and extremely competent, walk through the routine pre-waypoint checklist. It was a good flight, clear air, good visibility, the kind of mid-morning run that experienced captains called a Sunday, smooth and uneventful, except for the thing that Sandra Park had just told him over the interphone. He'd listened to her account without interrupting. Then he'd asked one question: "Is the passenger okay?" "He says he is." "Is the daughter okay?" "She's drawing," Sandra said, and there was something in the way she said it that Hayes found he couldn't quite categorize. "She's drawing clouds." Hayes replaced the interphone handset and looked out the windscreen at the vast, clean expanse of sky ahead. He'd been flying for 28 years. He'd had medical emergencies, structural anomalies, a bird strike over Louisville that had taken 2 engines, a hydraulic failure outside Denver that he still didn't like thinking about. He'd had drunk passengers and belligerent passengers, and once memorably, a passenger who had somehow smuggled a ferret aboard in a duffel bag. He'd seen a lot. But something in the way Sandra had said she's drawing was sitting in his chest differently. "Rodriguez," he said. "Captain, I'm going to walk the cabin in about 10 minutes. Rodriguez looked at him. "Everything okay?" Hayes thought about a little girl drawing clouds while her father sat beside her with a red mark on his face. "Yeah," he said. "I just want to say hello to the passengers." Victoria returned to the main cabin 40 minutes after the incident. She had composed herself with the particular efficiency of someone who has spent years managing her own emotional responses in front of passengers, a professional face, a professional posture, the whole apparatus of customer service reassembled into place. She moved through the rows with practiced ease, refilled water cups, collected trash, answered a question about connecting flights from the businessman in 9B. She did everything correctly and efficiently, and she did not look at row 12. Until she had to. She was working her way up from the rear, and there was simply no way to complete the service pass without stopping at row 12. She stood at the edge of the row with her trash bag and her professional face, and she looked at Daniel Brooks and she waited. He held out his cup without looking up from the paper where Olivia was drawing. "Thank you," he said, politely, the same way you'd thank anyone. No edge, no pointed silence, just straightforward courtesy. Victoria took the cup. She started to move on. "Excuse me," said a woman's voice. Victoria stopped. The woman with the paperback in the row behind Linda Reyes, according to the manifest, a 53-year-old middle school teacher from Decatur, was looking at her, with the red-rimmed eyes of someone who had been crying quietly for the better part of an hour. "Can I help you?" Victoria asked. "My trash," Linda Reyes said and held it out. Victoria took it. "My son is 36, Linda Reyes said. Victoria stopped. "He travels for work. He has 2 kids. My grandkids." Linda Reyes was looking at her steadily, without hostility, without drama. Just steadily. "I think about him every time he gets on a plane." Victoria didn't answer. "That's all," Linda Reyes said. "That's all I wanted to say." Captain Michael Hayes came through the cabin at 11:54 a.m. He was a solid, silver-haired man with a captain's walk, unhurried, deliberate, the kind of walk that says I am exactly where I'm supposed to be, and he moved through the rows the way experienced captains do, pausing here and there. A word with a nervous passenger, a smile for a child, the human performance of competence that good pilots understand is part of the job. He stopped at row 12. Daniel looked up, their eyes met. Hayes said nothing for a moment. He was looking at Daniel with the particular attention of someone who is seeing more than one thing at once, and trying to identify exactly what the second thing is. Daniel's posture, the angle of his attention. The way his eyes had tracked Hayes's approach from 4 rows out, not anxiously, not suspiciously, but with a quality of awareness that was very specific, and that Hayes had encountered before in very specific circumstances. "How's the flight treating you?" Hayes asked, casually. The standard captain in the cabin question. "Fine," Daniel said. "Good flight. Your daughter enjoying the trip?" Daniel looked at Olivia. "She's discovered that the clouds look like a dog named Bernie." Hayes leaned down slightly to look at Olivia's drawing. She'd covered most of the sketchpad page with a remarkably accurate approximation of a fluffy dog-shaped cloud, complete with what appeared to be a collar. "That's a good Bernie," Hayes said. Olivia looked up. "He lives next door to my grandma, the dog or the cloud." She laughed a pure, uncomplicated 8-year-old laugh. "The dog, the cloud is just visiting." Hayes straightened up and looked at Daniel again. "I heard there was some trouble earlier," he said. "Nothing I couldn't handle," Daniel said. Exactly what he'd said to Hoffman. The same words, the same tone. But Hayes heard something different in them this time, or rather, he heard something the same that he was now beginning to categorize. "You sure?" "Yes, sir. Not defensive, not performative. Just automatic." The word of someone who had existed in context where sir meant something specific. Hayes studied him for another moment. "You a military man?" he asked. A pause, not a long one. "No," Daniel said, "not military." Hayes waited, the way pilots wait, patient, unhurried, giving the silence room to fill itself. "Aviation," Daniel said after a moment. "I worked in aviation for a while." Hayes looked at him for a long moment. "What kind of aviation?" Daniel met his eyes. "Emergency response, aviation security." A few other things. The cabin around them was doing its best impression of not listening, which meant it was listening with extraordinary care. "You're a long way from that now," Hayes said. "A few years out," Daniel agreed. "Miss it?" Something moved across Daniel's face, complicated, brief, the expression of a man answering a question that has more than one right answer. "The people I worked with," he said finally, "not everything else." Hayes straightened his jacket. "Well," he said, "if anything comes up, you let us know." Daniel looked at him steadily. "I will." Hayes moved on. Gerald Hoffman watched the captain go and then looked at Daniel with an expression of pure, naked confusion. "What was that?" he said. "A captain checking on his passengers," Daniel said. "That was not that." Daniel handed Olivia a blue marker. "Bernie needs eyes," he said. At 12:17 p.m., something changed. It started as a sound, not a loud one, more of a deep, irregular thud from somewhere toward the rear of the aircraft. Not the sound of turbulence, not the sound of anything a seasoned traveler could comfortably categorize as normal. More like something shifting that shouldn't be shifting. The cabin registered it the way cabins register unexpected sounds, an involuntary pause in conversation, a collective tensing, a brief scanning of faces for confirmation or denial. The woman with the toddler tightened her arms around her child. The businessmen looked up from their phones. Gerald Hoffman gripped his armrest. The sound came again, deeper this time, more deliberate. And Daniel Brooks put down the pencil he'd been using to sketch a small Bernie, the dog beside Olivia's drawing, and he sat very still. His eyes went to the left side of the cabin wall, then to the overhead panel above row 15, then to the ceiling junction between the overhead bins and the fuselage skin. Olivia noticed the change immediately. She looked up from her drawing. "Dad, I need you to listen to me for a second," Daniel said quietly. He wasn't looking at her. He was still scanning the cabin, his eyes moving in a pattern that was very specific and very practiced, the kind of scan that goes past what's visible to what's there. "What's wrong?" "I don't know yet," he said. "Probably nothing." He put his hand on her arm. "But I need you to make sure your seatbelt is on," and tightened. "Can you do that for me?" She reached down and checked it without argument. This was he had spent years teaching her, the correct response when he used that particular tone. "No questions, just the action. It's on," she said. "Good girl." He pressed the call button. Sandra Park appeared. "Sir, I need to speak with the captain," Daniel said. Sandra looked at him. "I can relay it needs to be the captain." Something in his voice. Not urgency. Urgency would have been easy to dismiss. Something more specific. The precision of someone who is not alarmed but is very, very certain. Sandra hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up the nearest interphone handset. In the cockpit, the second sound had already registered on the rear systems panel as an anomalous pressure reading in the left aft section. Rodriguez had flagged it 30 seconds earlier. Hayes was looking at it with the focused calm of a man who has dealt with many anomalous pressure readings and knows that most of them are nothing, and some of them are not. The interphone buzzed. "Captain, I have a passenger in 12B. He's asking to speak with you directly," he says. Sandra's voice had something in it that Hayes couldn't immediately name. "He says it needs to be the captain." Hayes looked at Rodriguez. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Hayes picked up the interphone. "Put him on," he said. "Static then, Captain Hayes." The voice was calm. Steady. The voice of a man standing in the eye of something rather than running from it. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm seated in 12B. I don't want to create any alarm, but I need you to know that the sound you're experiencing from the rear left section is consistent with a specific kind of aft pressure regulator anomaly. The pattern of the sound 2 beats, then a deeper single beat, that's the pattern. I've heard it before." Hayes's eyes went to Rodriguez. "Mr. Brooks," Hayes said carefully, "what is your background?" "Emergency aviation security," Daniel said, "and about 6 years doing incident response for a maintenance contractor." A pause. "I know what this sounds like, Captain. I know how it sounds coming from a passenger. But if I'm right, you'll want to check the left rear system panel. Specifically the secondary pressure feed on the aft environmental control." The cockpit was very quiet. Rodriguez was staring at the anomalous reading on his panel. "How long ago did you first notice the sound?" Hayes asked. 4 minutes, Daniel said immediately. "The first sound was at 12:17. It's happening on a roughly 90-second interval." Hayes looked at the timestamp on the anomalous reading. 12:17. He set down the interphone handset and looked at Rodriguez. "Check the left rear secondary," he said. In the main cabin, the interphone conversation lasted 45 seconds. When it was over, the cabin attendant Sandra, not Victoria, came and stood at the edge of row 12. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "the captain would like you to come forward." Every head in the cabin turned. Gerald Hoffman's mouth opened slightly. Linda Reyes, the schoolteacher from Decatur, lowered her paperback. The businessman in 9B, who had been carefully not listening to anything all morning, set his phone face down on the tray table. Daniel unclipped his seatbelt. He looked at Olivia. "I'll be right back," he said. "Stay here. Where are you going?" "To talk to the captain." She looked at him with those two old eyes. "About the sound?" He stopped. "You heard it?" "I always hear things," she said. "You know that." He looked at her for a moment, this extraordinary child that his wife had left him to raise, this small and serious person who heard everything and said exactly what was true. "I'll be back in 5 minutes," he said. "Okay," she said. "And then Dad?" "Yeah, be the thing that fixes it," she said. "That's what you always say. Be the thing that fixes it." He held very still for 1 second. Then he stood up, stepped past Gerald Hoffman's wide-open face, and walked toward the front of the aircraft with the walk of a man who knew exactly where he was going. And behind him, in row 12, Olivia picked up her blue marker and drew Bernie the cloud dog's eyes. And the whole cabin watched her father go. This quiet man in the window seat who nobody had known anything about. The man who had been slapped, the man who had not fought back. The man who had given his daughter colored markers and let her draw clouds while the world decided what to do with its assumptions about him. He was walking toward the cockpit door, and behind him the entire cabin went silent. Not the silence of boredom, not the silence of discomfort. The silence of people realizing, all at once, that they have been watching a story without understanding what story it was. The silence of 47 strangers looking at each other and having the same thought, simultaneously, in 47 different versions of the same words. Who is that man? The cockpit door was 12 rows away. Daniel walked it in 23 seconds. He counted without meaning to an old habit, the kind that gets wired into you after years of working environments, where distance and time are the difference between a controlled situation and an uncontrolled one. 23 steps, 12 rows, one narrow aisle. He was aware of every eye in the cabin tracking him the entire way, aware of the particular quality of that attention, not hostile, not friendly, just the raw, unprocessed stare of people who have just had their understanding of a situation rearranged and haven't yet decided what to do with the new information. Sandra Park knocked twice on the cockpit door and said his name into the small interphone beside it. The door opened from the inside. Captain Hayes was standing at the threshold. He was a bigger man up close than he'd seemed from the aisle. Not physically, he was average height, silver-haired, with the kind of face that outdoor work and responsibility give a man over decades. But there was a quality of weight to him. The kind of weight that comes from being the person, in every situation, who is responsible for what happens next. He looked at Daniel for a long moment before he said anything. "Mr. Brooks," he said. Captain Hayes stepped back slightly. "Come in." Rodriguez, the first officer, glanced over his shoulder from the right seat. He was younger than Daniel had expected, mid-20s maybe, with the kind of focused face that comes from being the youngest person in a HASAC's room and knowing it. He gave Daniel a look that was half professional assessment and half something more personal. The look of a man recalibrating. The cockpit was small and dense with instrumentation. Daniel hadn't been in one in years, 4 years, 3 months, and some number of days that he hadn't been keeping track of, because he'd deliberately stopped keeping track, but the specific smell of it hit him immediately. Recycled air and electronics and the faint industrial overlay of aircraft fuel and hydraulic fluid. It was the smell of a place where things were managed, controlled, where the margin for error was measured in fractions of seconds, and the people who sat in the front seats knew it. He felt something move through him that he didn't try to name. "Close the door," Hayes said to Sandra, and she did. The three of them, Hayes, Rodriguez, Daniel, were alone in the enclosed space of 30,000 feet of altitude and about 12 square feet of cockpit. The panel in front of Rodriguez showed the anomalous reading as a small amber indicator on the lower right section of the environmental control display. Small, persistent, the kind of indicator that could be nothing, and very occasionally was not nothing. "Walk me through what you heard," Hayes said, no preamble. No diplomatic softening. Hayes was a man who, Daniel understood immediately, went directly to the center of things. He respected that. 2 irregular percussive impacts approximately 90 seconds apart, Daniel said. The first at 12:17. The second at 12:18 and 40 seconds, roughly. The quality of the sound, I know how to describe this, and I know it sounds specific, was consistent, with a check valve flutter in a pressurized aft line. Not catastrophic flutter, intermittent. The kind that produces a flutter and seat pattern. He paused. 2 short beats, then 1 longer resonant one. Hayes looked at Rodriguez. Rodriguez said, without turning from the panel. That's exactly what the anomalous reading profile looks like. 2 spikes, then a sustained deviation. The cockpit was very quiet for a moment. When did you last work in aviation? Hayes asked. Officially, 4 years ago. Daniel kept his voice neutral. I left the field after a family situation. I've been doing freelance maintenance consultation since groundside. I don't fly the planes anymore. I just ensure they're airworthy before they go up. Hayes was watching him with that pilot's attention, the kind that isn't just seeing a face, but reading everything around and behind the face. Aviation security, you said, among other things. What other things? Daniel looked at the amber indicator on Rodriguez's panel. Captain, I don't think we have time for my resume right now. A beat. Then Hayes said, no, we don't. He moved to stand beside Rodriguez and looked at the panel. What's your read on the risk profile if we're dealing with a check valve flutter? Depends how long it's been fluttering, Daniel said immediately. He moved to stand on Hayes's other side, not presuming to touch anything, not overstepping, but close enough to see the full display. If it started recently, you've got time. If it's been cycling since before takeoff, he stopped. When did the crew do the pre-flight check on the aft environmental? Rodriguez and Hayes exchanged a look. Standard pre-flight, Rodriguez said. But the sound I heard wasn't a new sound, Daniel said carefully. The quality of it, the resonance that comes from a valve that's been partially compromised for a while. It's not the sharp flutter of a fresh failure. It's the duller sound of something that's been working against itself. Hayes straightened. Get me Sanders on ground engineering, he said to Rodriguez. Already dialing, Rodriguez said. And that was when Daniel realized that Hayes had already known something was wrong before he walked through that door. He'd known it from the reading. He'd known it the moment Sandra relayed the message from row 12. He'd been looking for confirmation, not information. What Daniel had given him was both. Mr. Brooks, Hayes said, and his voice had shifted into a register that Daniel recognized as the register of someone who has accepted a situation and is now moving through it. I need to ask you to stay up here for a few minutes while we coordinate with ground. I may need you to characterize the sound profile to our engineering team. Of course, Daniel said. And I need to ask you something else. Daniel waited. The incident earlier, Hayes said. He didn't specify, he didn't need to. You handled it with a great deal of composure. It wasn't quite a question. Daniel answered it anyway. I had my daughter with me. Is that the only reason? Daniel looked at him steadily. No, but it's the most important one. Hayes held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, slow, the nod of a man filing information in exactly the right place. All right, he said. Let's fix the plane first. The radio crackled. Sanders from ground engineering came on the line, and Daniel stood in the cockpit of a commercial aircraft at 32,000 feet and did the work that had been wired into him over 11 years of emergency response, and for 45 minutes. The broken seat screen, and the slap, and the red mark on his cheek, and every assumption that 47 people had made about the quiet black single father in 12B existed in a separate universe from the man standing between the 2 front seats with his eyes on the instrument panel, calling numbers and sound profiles and pressure variance estimates with the calm exactitude of someone who had spent a decade making order out of emergency. He didn't think about Victoria Lane once, not once. He thought about the valve. He thought about the pressure differential. He thought about the altitude and the ambient temperature and the load calculations and the specific acoustic signature of a chow valve in partial flutter versus full flutter versus seated and cycling. He thought about Olivia. He thought about whether she'd finished Bernie, the cloud dog's eyes. He thought, fix the problem in front of you. That was the rule. The only rule, fix the problem in front of you and then move to the next problem. Don't carry the last problem into the new one. He'd learned that rule in a very specific place, in a very specific year, under very specific circumstances. But that was a different story, for now there was a valve and a flight, and 47 people in the cabin behind him who were waiting to land safely in Seattle. That was the problem. He fixed it. The decision ultimately was not to divert the flight. Sanders on the ground walked through the failure profile with Hayes and Rodriguez, and with Daniel providing the acoustic evidence. They established a high-confidence determination that the valve flutter was intermittent and bounded serious enough to require immediate ground maintenance upon landing, not serious enough to require an emergency diversion. Hayes made the call with the particular quality of authority that comes from 28 years of making exactly these kinds of calls, decisive, clear, and with the full weight of responsibility held visibly in his posture. He announced it to the passengers at 1:03 p.m. in the steady, undramatic voice of someone who has delivered much harder news in much harder circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, our maintenance team has identified a minor system anomaly in the rear section of the aircraft. Our engineering team has evaluated the situation, and we will continue our flight to Seattle without any change to our route. Upon landing, the aircraft will undergo routine maintenance inspection. There is no safety concern requiring any change to our flight plan. We appreciate your patience and will keep you updated. In the cabin, the announcement landed the way these announcements always land, with the immediate, instinctive fear response that human beings cannot help having when someone on an airplane says the word anomaly, followed by the gradual, rational reassessment that comes from hearing a calm voice say no safety concern, followed by the specific, lingering unease of people who are now aware that something that was not quite right has been returned to the condition of almost right, and who will not fully relax until wheels touch ground. Gerald Hoffman gripped his armrest. Linda Reyes closed her eyes for 3 seconds, breathed, and opened them again. The mother with the toddler pulled her child closer. Olivia looked up from her sketchpad and looked at the empty seat beside her. At the impression her father's weight had left in the seat cushion, and she held very still. Then she picked up the blue marker and finished Bernie's eyes. Daniel came back through the cockpit door at 1:09 p.m. He walked the 12 rows back to his seat, without looking at anyone in particular, though he was aware of every face, every angle of attention, every adjustment and recalibration happening in the rows he passed. He sat down. Olivia didn't say anything. She just turned the sketchpad so he could see it. Bernie the Cloud Dog was complete. He had enormous, slightly lopsided eyes and a wide, uncomplicated smile and a small collar with what appeared to be a tag that said, in Olivia's 8-year-old handwriting, Bernie. He looks like the real Bernie, Daniel said. I made his eyes bigger, Olivia said, so he can see everything. Daniel looked at the drawing for a moment. That's a good reason for big eyes. What did the captain want? To talk about the airplane, the sound. She considered this. Did you fix it? The captain and his team fixed it, Daniel said carefully. I just told them what I heard. She looked at him with the 2 old eyes. But you knew what the sound meant. Yes, how? From my old job, the one you don't talk about. A pause. Yeah, that one. She was quiet for a moment, looking at Bernie. Then were you scared up there? No. Were you sad? He looked at her. Why would I be sad? She shrugged, the way 8-year-olds shrug when they know exactly why they're asking a thing but aren't sure how to say it. Because it was your old job, and now it isn't. He sat with that for a moment. The specific weight of it. A little, he said. Maybe a little. She nodded, satisfied with the honesty. I like your new job better, she said. What's my new job? She looked at him like the answer was obvious. Being my dad, Gerald Hoffman, in the aisle seat, made a sound that was not quite a cough. He turned toward the window and appeared to find the sky extremely interesting for the next 45 seconds. In the row behind, Linda Reyes had been close enough to hear every word. She pressed her lips together and looked down at her paperback without reading it. Daniel put his arm around Olivia's shoulders, and she leaned into him with the complete, unquestioning trust of a child who has never had a reason to doubt that her father is exactly where he's supposed to be. It was the quietest, most devastating moment of the entire flight, and neither of them knew the rest of the cabin was watching. They rarely do the people at the center of the moments that matter most. They're always looking at each other. At 1:17 p.m., Victoria Lane came through the curtain from the forward galley. She had her service cart with her. She was doing the second beverage pass, and her face was correct, composed, professional, the whole apparatus of performance back in place. She moved through the rows with practiced efficiency. But her hands were different. Daniel noticed before anyone else. Not because he was looking for it, he wasn't watching her. He was watching Olivia draw a second cloud dog. This one apparently named Gerald, after the man in the aisle seat, who had approved the use of his name, but because noticing things was not something he could turn off. It was wired too deep. Victoria's hands were shaking. Very slightly. The kind of tremor that most people would attribute to the cart weight, or the recycled air, or 100 other explanations that weren't the real explanation. She reached row 12. She stopped. The cart between them felt like a significant distance, and no distance at all. "Something to drink?" she asked. Her voice was controlled. Steady. The voice she had assembled with professional precision. "Water, please," Daniel said, "and orange juice for my daughter." Victoria poured the water. She poured the orange juice. She set them on the tray tables with the careful exactness of someone, making sure their hands don't shake in front of anyone. She didn't look at him, and then at the last moment, right as she started to move the cart forward, she stopped. The way people stop when they've been running away from something, and suddenly realize they've been running in a circle. "Mr. Brooks," she said. He looked up. She was still not quite meeting his eyes. She was looking at a point approximately 2 inches to the left of his face, the practiced deflection of someone who is doing a hard thing and hasn't finished talking themselves into the full version of it yet. She started. "You don't have to," Daniel said. "I want to. You don't have to do it now." She looked at him then. Actually looked at him, and whatever she saw, whatever the full picture of Daniel Brooks in seat 12B communicated to her in that moment, with his daughter's cloud dogs on the sketchpad between them and the careful steadiness in his face, and the red mark that had faded but not disappeared, something in her professional composure cracked just slightly. "Just enough. I'm sorry," she said. "What I did was—" "Wrong," he said, not unkindly, just clearly, "yes." "I know," he said. "That's not enough," she said. "What I said. How I treated you, it wasn't." She stopped. Something moved across her face that was too complicated and too personal for an airplane aisle, and she seemed to know it. "I need to think about why I did it," she said. "Not just that I did it." Olivia looked up from her drawing. Victoria's eyes went to her, to the child, who had watched the whole thing happen, and something in her face changed in a way that was not professional and not composed, and not anything that could be managed or performed. It was just human, just the look of a person confronted with the face of a child who saw what happened. "I'm sorry you saw that," Victoria said to Olivia. "That wasn't right." Olivia looked at her for a long moment with those serious, measuring eyes. "My dad says you can't take back what you do," she said, "but you can change what you do next." The cart stood between them. Victoria Lane, 29 years old, a flight attendant who had spent her entire professional life constructing and maintaining an image of control, pressed her lips together and nodded once. "Your dad sounds smart," she said. "He is," Olivia said. "He fixed the plane." Victoria looked at Daniel. He shook his head slightly. "The captain fixed the plane." "You told them what was wrong," Olivia said, with the implacable accuracy of someone for whom facts are non-negotiable. Gerald Hoffman, in the aisle seat, made the not-quite-a-cuff sound again. Linda Reyes, in the row behind, set her paperback face down on her tray table for the second time in 2 hours. Victoria moved the cart forward. She didn't say anything else. But her hands, when she poured the next cup of water 3 rows up, were steady. At 1:34 p.m., Gerald Hoffman turned to Daniel. He had been working up to something for a while. Daniel could feel it the way you feel incoming, whether a pressure change in the atmosphere of the immediate space, a shifting of weight, the particular restlessness of a man who has something he needs to say and is trying to figure out how to say it without sounding the way he sounds. "I've got a son," Hoffman said finally. Daniel looked at him. "He's 34. Good kid. Real good kid." Hoffman was looking at his own hands, folded on the tray table in front of him. Big hands with the kind of wear on them that comes from decades of work. "I don't always—" He stopped. "Try it again. I've made assumptions about people. My whole life. About who they are, what they're doing, what their deal is. He paused. I'm 62 years old, and I've been making those assumptions for 62 years, and I've been wrong a lot more than I've known I was wrong. Because when you're wrong about a person, and they don't call you on it, you walk away thinking you were right. He looked at Daniel. I had you wrong, he said simply. From the minute you sat down, I had a whole story about you in my head before you said a single word. I'm not proud of that. Daniel held his gaze. What was the story? Hoffman was quiet for a moment. A man who was going to be difficult, he said. A man who was going to make the flight harder for everyone else. He shook his head. I've been on a lot of flights. I've made a lot of fast calls about people in airports and airplanes, and I've never not once stopped to think about what those calls cost the people I was making them about. Daniel said nothing. I heard what you said to your daughter, Hoffman said. After, about not being worried about yourself, about what she learned from watching, he looked out the window. I've got grandkids, 3 of them, and I thought about my son, about what I want his kids to learn from watching him. And I realized I have been modeling exactly what I don't want them to learn. It wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning, the particular kind that men of a certain age have in small private moments, when something cracks open the distance they've maintained between themselves and the truth. I appreciate you saying that, Daniel said. I don't need appreciation, Hoffman said. He said it gruffly, but not unkindly. I just needed to say it. All right. Hoffman nodded. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, 2 men who had met each other 3 hours ago with a story between them that was entirely in one person's head and was now irreversibly somewhere else. What's the other dog's name? Hoffman asked, nodding at the sketchpad. Olivia looked up. Gerald Hoffman blinked. He's Bernie's best friend, Olivia said. He's grumpy but nice on the inside, a long pause. Yeah, Hoffman said. That tracks, and he turned back to the window. Captain Hayes came through the cabin at 1:48 p.m. He wasn't doing the captain's walk this time, the casual pastoral stroll of a man greeting passengers. This was purposeful, deliberate. He moved down the aisle and stopped at row 12 with the directness of a man who has made a decision and is executing it without second guessing. Mr. Brooks, he said. Daniel looked up. Walk with me, Hayes said. They went back to the rear galley past Linda Reyes with her paperback, and the mother with the toddler and the businessmen, who both watched with undisguised attention, and Hayes pulled the galley curtain closed. The 2 men stood in the tight space, surrounded by the smell of coffee and recycled air, and Hayes looked at Daniel with the expression of a man who is about to say something he doesn't say often. What you did today, Hayes said, I'm going to be direct with you. What you identified, the way you identified it, the precision of the information you gave my crew, that wasn't something most people could do. Most people in your situation, after what happened earlier in the flight, would have either shut down or escalated. You did neither. You sat there, monitored the situation, identified a problem, and reported it through the correct channel with exactly the right information in exactly the right way. Daniel said nothing. I want to know why you left, Hayes said. The question arrived without warning and landed with the blunt specificity of something thrown accurately in the dark. That's personal, Daniel said. I know it is, Captain. I'm not asking as your captain, Hayes said. The flight's handled. I'm asking as someone who spent 28 years in this industry and knows what it looks like when a person who belongs somewhere isn't there anymore. Daniel looked at the galley curtain, at the thin line of light coming through the gap at the bottom where the curtain didn't quite reach the floor. My wife died, he said. The words were flat and clean and absolutely final. Hayes was quiet. She died 4 years ago. Olivia was 4. I was in the middle of a response situation when it happened. A long one. I'd been away for 6 weeks. He paused. I didn't make it home in time. The galley was completely silent except for the ambient roar of the engines. I decided I didn't want to be that far from my daughter again, Daniel said. So I left. I took the groundwork, the consulting. It keeps me close. It keeps me available. He looked at Hayes. It was the right call. I believe you, Hayes said. I'm not questioning the call. Then what are you asking? Hayes looked at him steadily. I'm asking if you miss it. Daniel held the gaze for a long moment. Every day, he said. Hayes nodded slowly, the nod of a man who understands something on a cellular level. The nod of someone who has loved a thing completely and organized his whole life around it and knows exactly what the person across from him means. "I'm going to put something in the flight report about your assistance today," Hayes said. "By name, with specifics. You don't need to do that." "I know I don't need to." Hayes straightened his jacket. "I want there to be a record of who was on this flight and what he did. Not because it helps me, because it's accurate." Daniel said nothing for a moment. "The incident earlier," he said finally, "the report will reflect that too." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Hayes said, "it will." "She was scared," Daniel said. It came out quietly, almost involuntarily. "Victoria, she was scared and she made a terrible decision. I don't know what her circumstances are. I don't know her story." He paused. "I only know mine." Hayes looked at him with an expression that Daniel would later be unable to adequately describe. Not admiration exactly, because admiration has a quality of distance to it, of looking up at something elevated. And what Hayes's expression conveyed was more immediate than that. More level. The recognition of one person by another person who has lived long enough to know exactly what they're looking at. "You're a remarkable man, Mr. Brooks," Hayes said. Daniel shook his head. "I'm a father on an airplane." "Yes," Hayes said, "and you're a remarkable man." He pulled the curtain aside. They walked back to the main cabin, and at 2:15 p.m., Flight 728 began its initial descent into Seattle. The announcement came over the interphone in Hayes's steady, unhurried voice, and the cabin responded the way it always responds to descent announcements. Tray tables stowed, seat backs up. The small collective activity of people reassembling themselves for arrival. The mother with a toddler buckled the small child in. The businessmen closed their laptops. Hoffman straightened in his seat and rolled his neck, and looked like a man trying to remember who he was before a 3-hour flight rearranged something in him. Olivia looked out the window. "I can see mountains," she said. "That's the Cascades," Daniel said. "They're bigger than the pictures." Things usually are. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the white-peaked ridgeline below. Then she said, "Dad, when we get to Seattle, can we get waffles?" "Yes, with the strawberries on top, if they have them." "And whipped cream?" "Don't push it." She pushed it. "And whipped cream?" "Yes, fine, whipped cream." She smiled at the window. "Good," she said. "I think today deserves whipped cream." He looked at her, this small, serious, extraordinary person who had spent the morning watching her father get slapped, and then watching him fix an airplane, and had filed both pieces of information in the same place, with the same equanimity, and had decided that what the situation called for was waffles with strawberries and whipped cream. He thought, "I did not deserve to be left with you." He thought, "I am going to spend every day becoming someone who does." The mountains came closer. The aircraft descended. Behind them, in rows 11 through 15, a collection of strangers who had spent the morning making decisions about a man they didn't know sat with those decisions and looked at the mountains outside and said nothing. And in row 12, a single father put his arm around his daughter and let her tell him everything she knew about the Cascade Mountains, which was, it turned out, quite a lot, because Olivia Brooks had done her research. She always did her research. She had learned that from her father. The wheels touched Seattle-Tacoma at 2:47 p.m., not a dramatic landing. Not the kind of arrival that gets remembered for its technical precision or its view, or the particular quality of the afternoon light over Puget Sound. Just a clean, professional touchdown, the controlled collision of metal and runway that 47 people felt in their spines and in the base of their stomachs, and, in several cases, in the sudden release of breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding, since a captain's voice had said the word anomaly at 30,000 feet. The cabin exhaled. Olivia pressed her face to the window and watched the ground come up to meet them with the focused intensity of a child experiencing something real for the first time and wanting to miss nothing. "We're here," she said. "We are," Daniel said. "We made it." "We always make it," he said, and then quietly, to himself, "We always make it." He believed it when he said it. He had learned to believe it specifically, not generally, not as a comfortable abstraction, but as a practiced, deliberate act of will, the kind of belief that gets built one landing at a time over 4 years of single fatherhood. when the distance between where you are and where you're supposed to be is measured not in miles but in the specific daily weight of being the only person standing between an 8-year-old and the uncertainty of a world that does not make promises. The aircraft taxied toward the gate. In the aisle seat, Gerald Hoffman unbuckled his seatbelt. The moment the seatbelt sign went off, the universal habit of the frequent traveler, the automatic claiming of 15 seconds, and then stopped. He rebuckled it. He sat. He looked at the seat back in front of him with an expression that nobody around him could quite read, but that Daniel, if he'd been watching, would have recognized immediately. It was the expression of a man deciding to change something. The jetway connected at 2:54 p.m. The forward door opened, and the cabin began its familiar choreography of departure: the standing, the retrieving of overhead luggage, the shuffling, the checking of phones, the brief, involuntary community of strangers who have shared airspace for 3 hours and are now returning to their separate lives. The mother with the toddler, the businessman, Linda Reyes, who put her paperback in her carry-on with the careful deliberateness of someone who is thinking about something other than what her hands are doing. Victoria Lane stood at the forward door. It was her job to stand there, to say goodbye, to thank passengers for flying, to be the final human face of the airline as people walked off the aircraft and back into their own stories. She had done it hundreds of times. She had the words memorized to the cellular level: the smile, the thank you for flying with us, the brief eye contact and the look away, the constant, efficient processing of faces. She stood at the door and she did her job, and she waited, because she knew he would be one of the last ones off. She knew it, the way you know things about a person after 3 hours of watching them from the corners of your professional attention. He would wait for the aisle to clear. He would let Olivia go first. He would take his time. He did. At 3:02 p.m., Daniel Brooks came up the aisle with Olivia's backpack on his shoulder and Olivia's hand in his, and the sketchpad tucked under his arm. Bernie the Cloud Dog, and Gerald the Cloud Dog, and 3 other unnamed cloud formations that Olivia had populated the page with during the descent. He walked at Olivia's pace. He was not hurrying. He reached the door. Victoria looked at him. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Miss Lane," he said. They looked at each other across the threshold, the narrow space between the aircraft and the jetway, between one thing and whatever came next. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, "about what your daughter said." He waited. "That you can't take back what you do, but you can change what you do next." She held his gaze. Her voice was steady, but steadiness, Daniel had learned, was sometimes the most effortful thing a person could produce. "I want to change what I do next." "That's between you and the airline," Daniel said. "And between you and yourself." Ina paused. "But I wanted you to know that I heard her." He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, the way he had looked at Hayes in the cockpit and at Hoffman in the aisle seat, and at every person on this flight who had shown him something true about themselves, even when what they showed him was something uncomfortable. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone he could choose to reduce to the worst thing they've done and has decided deliberately, and with full awareness, not to. "I heard you," he said. He walked off the plane. Olivia looked up at Victoria as they passed. "Thank you for the orange juice," she said, with total sincerity, with absolutely no awareness that this was a remarkable thing to say. Victoria Lane watched them go up the jetway, and she did not say anything for a long moment. Sandra Park appeared at her shoulder. "You okay?" Sandra asked. "No," Victoria said, "but I think that's correct. I think not being okay right now is the right response." Sandra looked at her. "That's the most honest thing I've heard you say in 2 years," she said. Victoria didn't answer. She turned back to the door. 3 passengers left to deplane. She did her job. But something had moved in her. Something that was not going to move back. The terminal at Seattle-Tacoma was in its standard late afternoon mode. The controlled chaos of arrivals and connections and the particular energy of a place where everyone is either arriving somewhere or leaving somewhere, and nobody is staying. Daniel moved through it with Olivia beside him, and the specific focused calm of a man who has been in complex environments and knows how to move through them without being moved by them. They were 20 feet from the baggage claim escalator when he heard his name. Mr. Brooks, he turned. Captain Hayes was standing 10 feet behind them, still in his uniform, his captain's bag over one shoulder. He had come off the aircraft through the jetway and caught up at a pace that suggested he'd been moving with purpose. Daniel stopped. Hayes reached him. "I almost didn't catch you," Hayes said. "I walk fast," Daniel said. "You do." Hayes looked at Olivia briefly, then back at Daniel. "I made a call while we were taxiing, to a colleague of mine. Name is James Whitfield. He runs the Safety and Incident Response Division for Pacific Air Group. You know them?" Daniel knew them. Regional carrier, good safety record, aggressive expansion over the last 3 years. He'd done 2 ground-side maintenance consultations for a subsidiary of theirs 18 months ago. "I know the company," he said carefully. "Jim and I have been friends for 20 years, Hayes said. I told him what happened today, not the incident with the crew. The technical situation, what you identified, how you identified it, how you communicated it." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. He held it out. "He wants to talk to you." Daniel looked at the card. He didn't take it yet. "Captain, I know what you're going to say." "With respect, I don't think you do." Hayes waited. "I left for a reason," Daniel said. "A good reason. A reason that's standing right next to me holding a sketch pad." He paused. "I'm not looking to go back to what I was. I understand that," Hayes said. "I'm not asking you to go back to anything." He kept the card extended. "Jim's division does consulting work, safety evaluation, incident response training. A lot of it is ground-based. A lot of it is exactly what you've been doing, except with the institutional support of a major carrier behind it. And I'm going to be direct the compensation that what you do is actually worth." Daniel looked at the card. Olivia was watching her father's face with the careful attention of a child, who understands that something important is happening, even when she doesn't understand all of its components. "You don't have to call him," Hayes said. "I told him you might not. He said to give you the card anyway." "Why?" "Because he said that the kind of person who doesn't jump at an opportunity is usually the kind of person he wants to talk to." Daniel took the card. He looked at it. "James Whitfield, Vice President, Safety and Incident Response, Pacific Air Group. A Seattle address, a direct number." He put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you," Hayes said, "for what you did today." For the flight, he extended his hand. Daniel shook it. It was a firm handshake, the handshake of 2 men who have been in a serious situation together and come out the other side and know that there's no adequate word for that. So they use the gesture instead. "Good luck, Mr. Brooks," Hayes said. "Safe flights, Captain," Daniel said. Hayes looked at Olivia one more time. "Take care of your dad," he said. Olivia considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "I always do," she said. Hayes smiled a real smile, the unfactured kind. He turned and walked back toward the crew corridor, and Daniel watched him go with the business card in his pocket and something in his chest that he was not ready to look at directly. Olivia tugged his hand. "Waffles," he said. "Waffles," he confirmed. They walked toward baggage claim. They had been in the terminal for 11 minutes when Daniel's phone rang. He almost didn't answer it. The number was a Seattle area code he didn't recognize, and his general policy with unrecognized Seattle numbers was to let them go to voicemail. But something, call it the particular quality of a day, that had already contained more improbable things than most, made him answer. "Daniel Brooks," he said. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Rachel Kim. I'm a producer with KSTV News in Seattle." The voice was professional, fast, and precisely calibrated, the voice of someone who has about 45 seconds to establish credibility before the person on the other end hangs up. "I'm calling because we've been made aware of an incident aboard Flight 728 from Atlanta. We have video footage from several passengers, and we'd like to—" "How did you get my number?" Daniel said. A fractional pause. "A passenger on the flight provided contact information for several mines." "Which passenger?" Another pause. Longer. "I'm not able to share that right now, but I can tell you that the video is already being shared on." "Miss Kim," Daniel said. His voice was level. "I appreciate you calling. I'm not going to speak with you today, Mr. Brooks. The video has already been viewed." "I understand that. Good afternoon." He ended the call. Olivia was looking at him. Who was that? A reporter. She absorbed this. About the airplane? About this morning. The slapping thing? He looked at her. Yeah, the slapping thing. She thought about it. Are we famous? No, he said. But people are talking about us? Some people, he said. For right now, she considered this with her evaluating eyes. Is that bad? It's complicated, he said. Is complicated bad? He thought about Captain Hayes's business card in his pocket. About Rachel Kim's 45-second pitch. About the 3 phones he'd clocked recording in the cabin before the slap had stopped echoing. About the particular unstoppable momentum of a story that has a video attached to it in the year 2024. Complicated is just complicated, he said. Come on. The bags will be at Carousel 3. They were at Carousel 3 for 6 minutes before his phone rang again. Different number, different area code. He declined it. It rang again 30 seconds later. Declined. A text arrived from his sister in Atlanta. Marcus just sent me a link. What is happening? And then another from his friend Calvin. Bro, you're everywhere right now. Call me when you can. And then a third, from a number he didn't recognize, that just said, we're proud of you. He stood at the carousel and watched the bags come around and declined 3 more calls, and did not look at the texts, and focused on the mechanical simplicity of identifying his luggage among all the other luggage and pulling it off the belt. The world was changing around him. He was standing still in the middle of it. That was the only strategy he had, and it was, he had found, usually enough. His bag came around at 3:21 p.m. He pulled it off the belt. Olivia's bag came around 90 seconds later. He pulled that off too. Ready? He said. Ready, she said. They walked out of the terminal. The afternoon air was cool and carrying the particular Pacific Northwest quality of light, the clear, clean brightness that comes after rain, though it hadn't rained yet. It would, but not yet. They had been outside for 40 seconds when Daniel saw Gerald Hoffman. Hoffman was standing 20 feet away at the rideshare pickup zone, his carry-on beside him, his phone in his hand with the expression of a man who has been staring at a screen for several minutes and is not pleased with what he's seeing. Hoffman looked up. He saw Daniel. He walked over. Have you seen this? Hoffman said, and turned his phone screen toward Daniel. The video was 47 seconds long. It had been shot from the row behind, and it was, Daniel noted with the particular clarity of a man seeing something simultaneously expected and jarring, extremely well framed. It showed everything, the argument, the slap, his head snapping sideways, the 2-second stillness, and then his face turning toward Olivia, and his hand on her knee, and his voice audible, because the cabin had been that silent saying, I'm not worried about what happened to me. I'm worried about what my daughter just learned from watching it. The view count at the corner of Hoffman's screen read 847,000. The timestamp on the post was 1:09 p.m. 4 hours ago, Daniel had been sitting at 32,000 feet with a check valve flutter and a sketch pad and a daughter drawing cloud dogs. The video had been posted while he was in the cockpit. It had been running without him for 4 hours. 800,000 views, Hoffman said. Daniel looked at it for another second. Then he handed the phone back. Okay, he said. Hoffman stared at him. Okay, that's your reaction? What reaction would you prefer? I don't know something. Anything. Hoffman shook his head. Do you understand what's happening right now? This is. I understand, Daniel said. I understand exactly what's happening. I've just decided not to be in a hurry about how I respond to it. Hoffman looked at him with the expression he'd been wearing on and off all day, the expression of a man who keeps expecting Daniel Brooks to behave like a different person and keeps being surprised when he doesn't. You are something else, Hoffman said. You know that? I've been told, Daniel said. Olivia tugged his sleeve. Is that us? She asked, pointing at the phone. Hoffman looked at her, then at Daniel, and made the executive decision to put his phone back in his pocket. No, he said firmly. That's a different thing. Olivia looked at him with clear, patient skepticism. I can tell when adults are not telling me the whole truth, she said. Hoffman pressed his lips together. Yeah, he said. I believe that. We should talk about it, Olivia said to her father. Whatever it is, you always say we should talk about things. We will, Daniel said, later, over waffles and whipped cream. And whipped cream. Hoffman watched this exchange with an expression that had crossed several internal borders in the last 3 seconds. He cleared his throat. I fly out of Atlanta twice a month, he said to Daniel. If you ever need, I mean, if you're ever on the same, he stopped. Tried again. I'd like to buy you a coffee sometime. Or a beer, whichever you prefer. Daniel looked at him. I prefer coffee, he said. Coffee then. Hoffman nodded, sharp and definitive, like a man closing a deal that matters to him more than he's willing to say out loud. He held out his hand. Daniel shook it. Gerald, Hoffman said. Not his last name, his first name, the deliberate informality of a man choosing to be a person rather than a business card. Daniel, Daniel said. They looked at each other for a moment, two strangers on a sidewalk outside an airport, who had shared a morning that was going to follow both of them for a long time. Take care of yourself, Hoffman said, and take care of. He looked down at Olivia. Gerald the Cloud Dog thanks you for your service, Olivia said seriously. Hoffman laughed. A real one, the sudden unguarded kind that escapes before you can apply any professional management to it. He laughed until his face went red and he had to look away. He picked up his carry-on. He walked toward the rideshare zone. He did not look back, but his shoulders were different. Lighter, the posture of a man who has put something down. Daniel watched him go. His phone was buzzing again. He turned the screen face down in his pocket without looking at it. Dad, Olivia said. Yeah, what actually happened on the plane? With the video, he crouched down so he was at her level. It was something he had always done, gotten physically level with her, when he needed to tell her something true. He'd started doing it when she was 2, when the world was still twice her size, and he'd wanted her to know that when it mattered, he would make himself smaller. Some people filmed what happened this morning, he said, with the flight attendant, and a lot of people have seen it. And some of them want to talk to me about it. She thought about this. Are you in trouble? No, he said. I didn't do anything wrong. She did, Olivia said factually, without heat. Yes, he said. She did, and she knows that, and she's going to have to deal with that. Is she in trouble? He looked at his daughter at the question in it, the particular 8-year-old question, that is really asking something larger, which is, does the world work the way it's supposed to work? Does wrong get addressed? Does the system respond? I think so, he said. Yeah, good, Olivia said. And then, with 8-year-old immediacy, okay, waffles now? He stood up. Waffles now, he confirmed. They walked toward the taxi rank, and Daniel put one hand on the top of Olivia's head, not guiding her, just touching her. The way parents touch their children when the need to confirm that they're real and present and intact becomes briefly overwhelming. And he thought about the business card in his pocket, and the video, with 800,000 views, and the reporter who would call again, and the 11 years of his life that had deposited him here, at this airport, on this afternoon, with this child. He thought about his wife. He thought about the way she had looked at him, in the last weeks, with the particular look that said, "You're going to be okay." Not as reassurance, as instruction, as the deliberate, intentional transfer of a conviction from one person to another. He had held it for 4 years. He was still holding it. They were getting into a taxi when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. Then something made him look. The text read, Mr. Brooks, this is James Whitfield. Michael Hayes is an old friend and a man whose judgment I trust completely. I'd like to meet tomorrow morning if you're available. No pressure, just coffee. I think you and I might have something to talk about. Daniel read it twice. He put the phone in his pocket. Olivia was already in the taxi, already giving the driver the name of the waffle restaurant she had identified on the plane, with the focus and efficiency of a person who does not leave the details of important things to chance. She got the address, Daniel told the driver. The driver looked in the rearview mirror at Olivia, who was showing him her phone with the restaurant pinned on the map. Got it, the driver said. The taxi pulled out. Seattle moved past the windows, the mountains, the water, the particular quality of this city that is always arriving and always leaving and always, underneath both of those things, staying. Daniel looked out the window. He thought about the valve in the aft section of Flight 728 and about the moment he'd stood in the cockpit and felt, for 45 minutes, like the version of himself that existed before everything changed. Not the lost version, not the version he was mourning. Just the complete version, the one that had room for all of it. The work and the daughter, and the grief and the competence and the love and the loss, all of it held at once without any one piece of it having to disappear for the others to exist. He had felt that for 45 minutes. In a cockpit at 32,000 feet, while his daughter drew cloud dogs 47 rows behind him. He thought about James Whitfield's text. He thought, just coffee. He thought, I know what just coffee means. He looked at Olivia, who was looking out her window at the city with the absorbed attention of a child arriving somewhere new and finding it exactly as interesting as she'd expected it to be. Dad, she said without looking away from the window.
Yeah, I think Seattle is good.
Yeah, he said. I think so too. Can we come back? He reached over and put his hand on her shoulder. Yeah, he said. I think we might be coming back. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to looking at the city. And in his pocket, the business card from James Whitfield held the number of a phone call that Daniel Brooks had not yet decided to make but was, in the precise way that the most important decisions of your life happen not in a rush. Not in a moment of drama, but quietly, in the back of a taxi, with your daughter's shoulder under your hand, beginning to decide. Outside, Seattle spread in all directions. Inside, a man who had spent 4 years becoming one thing was discovering that becoming one thing does not require the erasure of everything else you were. That was the thought. Small, quiet, undramatic, the kind of thought that changes everything. The waffles came with strawberries and whipped cream. Olivia ate with the focused satisfaction of a person whose plan has executed correctly. Daniel drank his coffee and watched her and let the restaurant noise silverware, conversation, the hiss of a coffee machine, the particular urban hum of a city that doesn't know or care what happened on Flight 728 wash over him like water over stone. His phone had received 43 notifications in the time it took them to get from the airport to the restaurant. He knew because he'd checked once, at 3:47 p.m., and then turned the screen face down on the table and left it there. 43 and climbing. You're not eating, Olivia said. I'm drinking. That's not eating. I'm not hungry. She pointed at his plate with her fork. He had ordered eggs and toast, which were sitting untouched. You have to eat when you're stressed, she said. You always tell me that. I'm not stressed. She gave him the look, the one that was her mother's look, the one that said, without a single word, that she was aware of the gap between what he was saying and what was true, and she was going to wait, patiently, and without judgment, for those two things to get closer together. He picked up a piece of toast. Thank you, she said, and went back to her waffles. He ate the toast and thought about the business card in his pocket, and the text from James Whitfield, and the 43 notifications, and the 800,000 views that had, in the 3 hours since he'd seen Hoffman's phone at the airport, almost certainly become something larger. He had not checked. He was choosing not to check. He was choosing, instead, the specific gravity of this restaurant booth, this coffee, this child who was cutting her waffle into precisely equal squares before eating them. At 4:12 p.m. his phone rang. He looked at the screen. The number was Calvin's. Calvin Warren, his closest friend since their time at Morehouse, 20 years of knowing each other through everything that 20 years can contain. He answered it. Where are you? Calvin said without preamble. Seattle restaurant, having waffles with Olivia. Daniel. Calvin's voice had a quality to it that Daniel recognized the specific register Calvin used when he was trying to hold several strong emotions in the same container, and was not entirely succeeding. Bro, have you seen the numbers? I've seen some numbers. Some numbers, Daniel. It's past 4 million. The restaurant continued around him. The coffee machine hissed. Olivia arranged a strawberry carefully on her next waffle square. 4 million, Daniel said. 4 million views. It's been 12 hours. It's trending on every platform. It's on the news. Not local news, network news. They're running it on CNN. MSNBC picked it up. There's a segment on Fox about whether the flight attendant should be fired. Calvin paused. There are 2 hashtags trending. One of them has your name in it. Daniel set down his coffee cup. Which one, he said, and he was surprised by how steady his voice was. Justice for Daniel Brooks, Calvin said. And the other one is, and I want you to hear this, man. I want you to actually hear it. The other one is Be the That Fixes It. Daniel was very still. Where did that come from? He said quietly. Olivia, Calvin said. Someone recorded the moment on the jetway. You two were talking and somebody caught Olivia's voice. Just that one line, be the thing that fixes it. It's everywhere, man. It's on t-shirts already. Someone's selling t-shirts with that line on it and they've already sold. Calvin, yeah, I need you to stop talking for a second. Silence. Across the table, Olivia had stopped eating. She was watching him with those eyes. Okay, Calvin said finally. I'm stopped. I need to think, Daniel said. I know you do. I needed to tell you. Before you heard it from someone who doesn't know you. I needed it to be me. Daniel looked at his daughter. I appreciate that. What are you going to do? He looked at the business card he'd placed on the table beside his coffee cup. James Whitfield, Pacific Air Group. I'm going to finish my coffee, he said. And watch Olivia eat her waffles. And then I'm going to go to the hotel and think. That's it for now. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I have a meeting. With who? Someone Captain Hayes recommended. A pause on Calvin's end. The captain of the flight? Yes, another pause. Longer. Daniel, what actually happened on that plane today? Daniel looked at Olivia, who had resumed eating with the patience of a child who trusts that the adult conversation happening across the table will be explained to her when the time is right. A lot, Daniel said. Yeah, he said. I think I actually might be. He heard Calvin exhale a long, relieved breath, the breath of a man who has been carrying someone else's weight alongside his own for 4 years and has just felt it shift, incrementally, towards something lighter. Okay, Calvin said. Call me tonight, I will. And Daniel Calvin stopped. Started again. She would have been proud of you today. You know that. She would have called me the second she saw that video. And she would have said, Calvin, you see my husband? That's my husband. Daniel held the phone against his ear and said nothing for a moment. Yeah, he said. I know. He ended the call. Olivia was watching him with the careful attention she reserved for the moments when she understood that something important had just passed through her father, like weather. Was that Uncle Calvin? She said. Yeah, is he okay? He's good, he said. Hi. She nodded, satisfied, and picked up her fork. Then she stopped and looked at him directly. Dad, are we going to have to talk to reporters? He looked at her. Why would you think that? Because Uncle Calvin uses his reporter voice when he's talking about reporter things, she said. He has 3 voices. Regular Calvin, reporter Calvin, and the voice he uses when he thinks something is serious. That was serious voice. Daniel looked at his daughter, this 8-year-old, who heard everything, categorized everything, filed everything in exactly the right place and thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that whatever he had done right in his life, this child was the proof of it. Maybe, he said, we don't have to decide that tonight. Okay, she said. Can I get more whipped cream? Yeah, he said. You can get more whipped cream, he signaled the server. The video, by the time Daniel got to the hotel at 5:30 p.m., had crossed 6 million views. He knew because he finally turned his phone screen up and looked at it, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed while Olivia was in the bathroom brushing her teeth. And the number hit him with the particular physical quality of information that is too large to process in a single moment. The kind of number that doesn't mean anything in the abstract and means everything in its implications. 6 million people had watched him get slapped. 6 million people had watched him put his hand on his daughter's knee. 6 million people had heard, or read in closed captions, his voice saying, I'm not worried about what happened to me. I'm worried about what my daughter just learned from watching it. He sat with that number for a long time. He thought about what it meant to be seen by 6 million strangers. He thought about how different it was from being seen by the 47 people on the plane that had felt immediate, specific, contained. 6 million was something else. 6 million was a crowd you couldn't face. A crowd with no faces. A crowd that had feelings about you without knowing anything about you, which was, he noted with the dry precision of a man who had been judged by strangers before, not entirely different from being in row of flight 728 at 11 a.m. The only difference was the scale. He thought, every single one of those 6 million people made a decision about who I am based on 47 seconds of video. He thought most of them got it wrong in the same direction this time. But they still got it wrong. He thought, is this better? He sat with that question for a long time. Olivia came out of the bathroom in her pajamas, with her teeth brushed, and her hair in the 2 braids he'd learned to do with the specific level of tightness she required, not too tight, because it made her scalp hurt, not too loose, because they came undone, and she looked at him sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hands, and she said, "Okay, tell me." He looked at her. "The whole thing," she said. "You said over waffles." "We had waffles, so tell me." He patted the bed beside him. She climbed up and sat cross-legged with the patience of someone who has been waiting all day for the conversation to arrive and is ready for it. He told her, all of it. He told her in the specific language he'd developed over 4 years of being a single father to an 8-year-old who demanded accuracy, not simplified, not softened, but translated. He told her about the video and the view count and the hashtags, including the one with her line on it, and he watched her face as she processed it. She was quiet for a long moment after he finished. "People are selling shirts with my words," she said. "Apparently. Do I get any of the money?" He almost laughed. "No, that's not how it works. That doesn't seem right." "It isn't," he agreed. "A lot of things aren't." She was quiet again. "Then are you scared of what?" "Of all those people watching." He thought about it honestly. "A little," he said. "Not the way you might think. I'm not scared of the attention. I'm scared of what happens when people decide who you are without knowing you. Because they do it both ways. They do it badly, like this morning. And they do it kindly, like tonight. And both of them feel like being looked at through glass. Like being an idea instead of a person." Olivia thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "But you are a person," she said. "I know that. So that's what matters." "It's more complicated than that, Livy." "Maybe," she said. "But complicated doesn't mean wrong." She looked at her hands for a moment. "Mom used to say that when people don't know your story, they make one up. And the made-up one is always simpler." He looked at her. "She said that to you?" "She said it a lot. I was little, but I remembered." She looked up. "I think today people saw some of your real story. Not all of it, but some." He sat with that. "Your mom was smarter than both of us," he said. "I know," Olivia said, without sadness, just fact. "The particular relationship a child has, with the memory of a parent they lost young, not grief exactly, but the clear-eyed carrying of a truth." "You should sleep," he said. "I know." She didn't move. "Dad, the meeting tomorrow. The one the captain set up. Are you going to go?" He looked at the business card on the nightstand. He'd taken it out of his pocket when they checked in and put it there, and it had been in his peripheral vision ever since. "I think so," he said. "Good," she said immediately. "You don't even know what it is." "I know it scared you enough to not put the card away," she said. "Which means it matters. And things that matter are worth being scared about." He looked at her. "Who taught you that?" he said. She looked back at him steadily. "You did," she said. "Go to sleep, Dad." She climbed under the covers with the decisive efficiency of a person whose business is concluded. He tucked her in. He turned off the lamp on her side. He sat in the dim light of the hotel room for a long moment, looking at his daughter and the business card and the phone screen with its relentless accumulating numbers. Then he picked up the phone and typed a text to James Whitfield. "Mr. Whitfield, this is Daniel Brooks. Captain Hayes gave me your number. I can meet tomorrow morning. What time works for you?" He sent it. He sat in the dark. 40 seconds later, the reply came, 8 a.m. "I'll send the address. Looking forward to it, Mr. Brooks." He set the phone down. He sat with whatever that was the thing moving in his chest that was not quite hope and not quite fear, but had the quality of both. The feeling of standing at the edge of something that is about to change, and knowing it, and not being able to see past it. He sat with it. And somewhere across the city, at a hotel that was smaller and less comfortable, and that she had booked herself because the airline had suspended her pending investigation, Victoria Lane sat in a room and watched the video for the 14th time. Not to torture herself, or not only for that. She was watching it because there was something in it she needed to understand. Something that she kept trying to reach and kept missing. The specific something in Daniel Brooks' face in the 2 seconds after the slap. Before he turned to Olivia. The thing his face did in those 2 seconds that she hadn't seen at the time. Because she'd been too focused on her own adrenaline, her own justification. The furious internal machinery of a person who has just done something terrible, and is working very hard not to know it yet. She watched it again, and this time, the 14th time she saw it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt, though hurt was there. It wasn't dignity or composure or any of the words that the people in the comment section were using to describe him. It was grief, a grief so practiced and so contained that it looked from the outside like stillness. But it was grief. The grief of a man who has been in this position before, not this specific position, not this specific airplane, but this position. The position of being reduced, of having someone look at him and decide, in an instant and with complete confidence, that they knew who he was. She had done that. She had done it in the first 5 seconds. She had looked at Daniel Brooks in seat 12B and assembled a story about him before he spoke a single word, and she had managed that conversation, from the first moment to the last, not with the person he was, but with the person she'd decided he was. She had done something else too, though. Something she had been working up to admitting. She had been afraid of him, not of his size, not of anything physically threatening, but of the particular authority in his voice, the calm, level quality of it, the way it didn't ask permission. She had experienced that quality of voice as a challenge to her authority, which, in her role, on her aircraft, was the one thing she protected above everything else. The one thing that kept the whole performance coherent. And she had reacted to the threat she felt with the only tool she'd used for 10 years to manage threats. Control. She had tried to control him. And when control failed, when this quiet, calm man in seat 12B continued to be exactly himself regardless of her authority, something in her had snapped. That was the truth. That was the truth she had been circling for 14 viewings of a 47-second video. She was afraid of him because he wasn't afraid of her. She sat with that. It was the worst thought she'd had about herself in a long time. Her phone buzzed. It was her supervisor at the airline, for the 3rd time that evening. She declined the call. The investigation was tomorrow. She had a lawyer. She had a statement prepared. She had the whole procedural apparatus of institutional consequence assembled and waiting. None of that was the thing she needed tonight. She opened her texts. She found the name she was looking for, Sandra Park. She typed, "Are you at the Seattle Layover Hotel? I need to talk to someone who will tell me the truth." Sandra's reply came in under a minute. "Yes, room 412. Come over." Victoria sat in the dark of her room for one more moment. Then she stood up, picked up her key card, and went out. In the elevator, on the way up to the 4th floor, she thought about what Daniel had said to her at the door of the aircraft. "I heard you 2 words, no absolution, no penalty. Just acknowledgement, the specific, precise acknowledgement, a person who has chosen to see you clearly." She had not deserved it. She wasn't sure she knew how to deserve it. But she was going to spend the next significant portion of her life finding out. The elevator opened. She walked down the hall. Sandra Park answered the door, in her off-duty clothes with a cup of tea in her hand. And she looked at Victoria's face with the quiet attention of someone who has been waiting for this knock. "Come in," she said. Victoria came in. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said. "I need to say it to someone who knows me and will not let me get away with saying it halfway." "Okay," Sandra said. "I was afraid of him," Victoria said. "That's why I did it. Not because he was wrong. Because he made me feel like I had no control over who he was. And I couldn't stand that." The room was quiet. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said in 2 years," she said. Maybe longer. It was exactly what she said at the forward galley on the plane, in a different context, and about a different sentence. 2 true things, 2 hours apart, from the same person who kept surprising herself with her own accuracy. "What do I do with that?" Victoria said. "You start there," Sandra said. "You start exactly there, and you don't let yourself start anywhere easier." Victoria sat down. They talked for 2 hours. At 10:15 p.m., Daniel Brooks's phone showed 11.3 million views. He was sitting in the dark of the hotel room, with Olivia asleep beside him, looking at the number the way you look at something you can't change and can only decide how to hold. 11 million. 11 million people who had watched 47 seconds of his life and felt something strong enough to share it, to comment on it, to make hashtags about it, to put his daughter's words on t-shirts that were selling in the hundreds. He thought about all those people. He thought about the ones who looked at the video and saw the slap and felt rage on his behalf, and how some of that rage was real solidarity, and some of it was borrowed anger that belonged to their own unprocessed experiences. He thought about the ones who looked at his face and saw themselves. He thought about the ones who looked at Olivia and thought about their own children. He thought about the ones who had already moved on to something else, for whom this had been 47 seconds of content in a day full of content, and who would not remember his name by morning. He thought about the ones who would wake up tomorrow and see the number, and see his name trending and feel, for the first time, the particular dangerous comfort of a crowd that agrees with you and who would mistake that comfort for justice. He thought justice is not a hashtag. He thought justice is not a t-shirt. He thought justice is a conversation that nobody wants to have because it requires the person having it to be responsible for something, and responsibility is heavy, and people put down heavy things when they can. He looked at Olivia. She was sleeping on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek and the slight, regular movement of her breathing, and she was, as she always was in sleep, utterly peaceful. The kind of peace that comes from a body that has done everything it was supposed to do and is resting without guilt. He had failed to protect her from what happened on the plane this morning. He knew it. He had been sitting with it since 11:14 a.m. The slap had happened in front of her. She had seen it happen. She had seen her father's head snap sideways. She had seen the red mark. She had sat in seat 12A with her backpack in her lap and her colored markers, and she had watched a stranger hit the most important person in her world, and there had been nothing Daniel could do to take that image out of her. He had failed to prevent it, but he had chosen in the 2 seconds afterward what she would also see. He had chosen that she would see him turn to her first, that she would see his hand on her knee, that she would hear his voice steady and sure, that she would see him breathe, that she would see him give her markers and let her draw clouds and choose her over the situation, over and over, for the next 4 hours. He had chosen that she would see a man who could be hit and still choose what to do next. That was the only choice that had been available to him. He had made it. He thought it was the right one. He looked at the business card on the nightstand. He thought about the meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m., about James Whitfield, who was a stranger with a job offer and a coffee invitation, and Hayes's endorsement. About the cockpit at 32,000 feet, and the 45 minutes of feeling complete. He thought about what Olivia had said. Things that matter are worth being scared about. He thought about his wife, who had said, in the last weeks, "You're going to be okay." Not a promise, an instruction. He set the phone face down. He lay down beside his daughter. He closed his eyes. Outside, Seattle continued to be Seattle, the water, the mountains, the rain that had finally arrived in the night, tapping the hotel window with the patient. Insistent rhythm of something that has been coming for a long time and is simply finally here. He slept. He did not dream of the slap. He dreamed of his wife's face, and his daughter's laugh, and a cockpit windscreen full of clear air, and the steady, gorgeous run of instruments that are all reading exactly what they should be reading, and the particular quality of altitude that makes the world below look like something that can be understood, if you're high enough, if you're calm enough, if you're patient enough to wait for the view. He slept, and at 7:47 a.m. the next morning, Daniel Brooks buttoned his jacket, kissed the top of Olivia's head where she sat eating hotel breakfast cereal with the focus of someone running on schedule, and picked up his keys and the business card. He paused at the door. "Hey," he said. Olivia looked up. "Be good," he said. "I'm always good," she said. "Be extra good," he said. She considered this. "What's extra good?" "Don't teach the hotel staff any new words," he said. She looked at him with absolute innocence. That was 1 time. It was 3 times, he said. "I'll be back by 10. "Okay," she said. "Dad, yeah, fix it," she said. He looked at her. She went back to her cereal. He opened the door and walked out into the morning, and toward whatever the next version of his life was going to require of him. He was not afraid. He was ready. The coffee shop was 3 blocks from the Pacific Air Group regional office, and James Whitfield was already there when Daniel arrived at 7:58 a.m. Daniel spotted him before Whitfield spotted him, a habit, the kind that doesn't leave sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee already ordered, and a leather portfolio open in front of him. 60-something black, with the particular posture of a man who has spent decades in rooms where decisions get made and has stopped needing to perform anything for anyone. He was reading something on his phone, and when Daniel pushed through the door, Whitfield looked up with the immediate, assessing attention of someone who has been waiting and has been thinking about this moment. He stood, they shook hands. "Mr. Brooks," Whitfield said. "Mr. Whitfield," Daniel said. "James," Whitfield said. "Daniel," Daniel said. They sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. The coffee shop moved around them, morning rush, the soft percussion of cups and conversation, the particular energy of a city starting its day. Whitfield looked at Daniel across the table, with the directness of a man who does not have time for preamble, and has decided not to use any. "I watched the video," Whitfield said. Daniel wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "Most people have. 14 million views as of this morning," Whitfield said. "I checked at 6:30. 14 million. 3 more million in the 8 hours since Daniel had last looked." He absorbed this without changing his expression, though something registered in him, not the number itself, but the rate. The acceleration of it, the world running towards something at a speed that had stopped being manageable. "I didn't watch it because of the incident," Whitfield continued. "I watched it because Michael Hayes called me while you were still in that cockpit, and the way he described what happened up there, the technical precision, the communication, the composure, I needed to see the whole picture. A man who behaves like that in a cockpit and then goes back to his seat and does what you did." He paused. "That's not a coincidence, that's character." Daniel said nothing. "Tell me why you left," Whitfield said. It was the same question Hayes had asked in the galley, 32,000 feet above the ground. Daniel recognized it as the question, the one that everything else depended on, the load-bearing wall of his entire story. He had answered it honestly with Hayes. He gave Whitfield the same honesty. "My wife died," he said. "I was on assignment. I didn't make it home in time. I decided my daughter needed a father who was present, not a professional who was excellent and absent." Whitfield listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How old is your daughter now?" 8. "How old was she when you left the field?" 4. "So you've been doing ground consulting for 4 years to stay close to her?" "Yes, and is it enough?" Whitfield asked. "The consulting. The groundwork. Is it enough for you?" The question arrived like something thrown accurately in the dark, and Daniel felt it land in exactly the place he'd been protecting for 4 years. He looked at Whitfield steadily. "Some days," he said. "And other days?" "Other days I'm in a cockpit at 32,000 feet, and I feel like I've been underwater for 4 years, and someone just let me come up for air." The words came out before he'd fully decided to say them. He heard them and didn't take them back. The truth, when it finally surfaces, has a momentum that's more expensive to stop than to let run. Whitfield looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most honest answer I've gotten in an interview in 15 years, he said. "Is this an interview?" Daniel said. "Everything is an interview," Whitfield said. "The question is whether both people know it." He picked up his coffee. "Here's what I want to tell you. What I built at Pacific Air Group's Safety Division is not a desk job. It's not a title, it's a program. Incident response training, safety evaluation, system vulnerability assessment, and a mentorship track for aviation professionals who are in exactly your position. People who left the field for legitimate reasons and need a structured path back that doesn't require them to sacrifice what they left for." Daniel looked at him carefully. "What does that path look like?" 40% travel, 60% ground-based Seattle hub with flexibility for remote work. You would be a senior consultant, not a junior one. Your background qualifies you for a level that most people spend a decade working toward." He paused. "And your daughter could be enrolled in the Pacific Air Group Dependent Care Program School Partnership, Aftercare, the full package. We've built it specifically for employees whose family situations require it." The coffee shop continued around them. Daniel heard none of it. "You built that program?" he said. "I built it. Because I lost 3 exceptional people in 2 years who left the field for family reasons," Whitfield said. "And I realized the industry was asking people to choose between being good at what they do and being present for the people they love. That's a false choice, and it's a stupid one, and it costs us people we can't afford to lose." Daniel looked at his coffee. He thought about Olivia eating cereal at the hotel. He thought about fix it, which was what she had said at the door. He thought about the business card that had been on his nightstand and was now in his jacket pocket. He thought about his wife's face in last night's dream and the words she had given him like a road map for a journey she knew she wouldn't be taking with him. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course," Whitfield said. "And I need to talk to my daughter." Whitfield's expression did something then, something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to it. The expression of a man recognizing something he respects. "How old did you say she was?" he said. 8, and you consult her on major decisions." "She's the smartest person I know," Daniel said, "and it's her life too." Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his portfolio and produced a document, not a contract, Daniel noted, but a program overview. Clean, detailed, thorough. The document of someone who had prepared to answer questions rather than to close a sale. "Take it with you," Whitfield said. "Read it. Talk to your daughter." He paused. "I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'll let you go." Daniel waited. "Michael Hayes has been flying for 28 years, Whitfield said. In 28 years, he has recommended 3 people to me. One of them is now running safety operations for the entire Pacific Northwest region. Another is the youngest chief inspector we've ever had." He looked at Daniel directly. "He called me while you were still in the cockpit. While the situation was still active. He didn't wait until it was over to tell me about you. He called me in the middle of it. The table was quiet. Think about what that means," Whitfield said. "And call me when you're ready." He stood. He shook Daniel's hand. He picked up his portfolio and walked out of the coffee shop into the morning with the unhurried stride of a man who has done what he came to do and trusts the outcome to be what it is. Daniel sat at the corner table for 8 more minutes, alone with his coffee and the program overview and 14 million views, and the particular, enormous quiet of a man standing at the exact point where his past and his future are asking him to choose. He chose, not there, not at that table. But something in him settled the specific settling of a decision that hasn't been spoken yet but has been made, the way water settles after something has moved through it, not still exactly, but no longer turbulent. He picked up his phone. He called Calvin. "I'm taking the meeting seriously," he said when Calvin answered. "Define seriously," Calvin said. "I'm going to say yes." A pause. Long enough that Daniel checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Calvin," he said. "I'm here," Calvin said, and his voice had the quality it got in the moments that mattered, stripped of everything performative, just the raw material of a 20-year friendship. "I'm here, man. I'm sitting here, and I'm thinking about where you were 4 years ago and where you are right now, and I can't." He stopped. "I know," Daniel said. "She would lose her mind," Calvin said. "I know," Daniel said, again, in the best possible way. "She would call me every day for a month just to say she told you so." Daniel looked out the window at the Seattle morning. "Yeah," he said. "She would." They stayed on the line for a moment without speaking, the two of them, holding the silence of people who understand that some conversations don't require words to be complete. "Go get your daughter," Calvin said finally, "and tell her what she already knows." Daniel went back to the hotel. At 10:03 a.m., he sat across from Olivia at the small table by the window, the program overview between them. He had explained it in the specific, accurate language he always used with her, not simplified, not softened, translated. He watched her read through the summary pages with the focused attention of a child who has always been told that her opinion matters and has organized her entire relationship to the world around that truth. She read for 4 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. "It says Seattle," she said. "Yes, we'd move to Seattle?" "If we decided yes." She looked out the window at the city. Then back at him. "I like Seattle," she said. "You've been here for 15 hours, he said. "I know what I like," she said, with the absolute, unironic confidence of an 8-year-old who does in fact know what she likes. "And also," she pointed to a line on the program overview. "It says Dependent Care Partnership with Seattle Public Schools. That means I'd go to school here, yes, with kids who live here. Yes, not just visiting kids, not visiting, actually here." She looked at the document again. Her finger moved to another section. "And you'd be doing the airplane safety work again." "Yes, with some travel, but mostly ground-based." How much travel? 40% of the time, but structured, planned. Not the way it used to be. She absorbed this. 40% means you're here 60%, she said. Yes, plus nights and weekends. Yes, so most of the time, she said. You'd be here most of the time. Yes, Livy. She put both hands flat on the document and looked at him with those eyes, the eyes that were her mother's forehead and her grandmother's mouth and something entirely her own. Something that had been building for 8 years in the specific soil of the life they had made together. Dad, she said, yeah, you're happy when you do that work. It wasn't a question. He answered it anyway. I am, he said. You're happy being my dad, too. That's a different kind of happy, he said. That's not happy. That's the thing everything else exists inside of. She thought about this with the seriousness of someone testing a structural claim. Okay, she said, then say yes. He looked at her. You're sure, he said. She gave him the look, the one that was her mother's. The one that said she was aware of the gap between what he was asking and what he already knew. You already decided, she said, at the coffee place. I could tell when you walked in. He shook his head slowly. You couldn't possibly have. You were walking differently, she said. You walk heavy when you're carrying something you haven't decided. You were walking light. He sat with that. Your mom used to say the same thing, he said. Very quietly, Olivia looked at him without flinching. I know, she said. She told me once. I was little, but I remembered. The room was very still. Okay, he said. Yes. She nodded once, the nod of someone whose recommendation has been accepted. Then she picked up her orange juice and drank the rest of it and said, Can we go see the water before we leave? The big water. The sound, Puget Sound, he said. Yes, that one. Yeah, he said. We can do that. Good, she said. I want to draw it. 3 days later, the airline completed its preliminary investigation of the incident on Flight 728. The findings were made public through a brief, formal statement that contained more legal precision than human language, but the substance of it was clear. Victoria Lane had been suspended without pay, pending a full review. The incident had been classified as a violation of the airline's conduct standards at the most serious level. And the airline had announced, in the same statement, a mandatory retraining program for all cabin crew, a program specifically focused on de-escalation, implicit bias recognition, and passenger interaction standards. The statement did not name Daniel Brooks. It didn't have to. 14 million people already knew the name. Daniel read the statement once, on his phone, standing in the kitchen of his Atlanta apartment, on the morning after they'd flown home from Seattle. He read it without expression. He set the phone down. He made Olivia's breakfast. Calvin called at 8:15 a.m. You saw the statement? He said. Yes. How do you feel? Daniel thought about it honestly. Like a thing has been documented, he said. Like the record is more accurate now than it was 4 days ago. Which is that matters. It matters that it's accurate. But, Calvin said. He knew Daniel well enough to hear the conjunction coming. But I've been thinking about Victoria Lane, Daniel said. About what she's doing right now, in her apartment. Reading the same statement, Calvin was quiet. She made a terrible decision, Daniel said. She made it for reasons she's going to have to sit with for a long time. And the investigation is correct. There have to be consequences. There have to be standards. There has to be a record. I'm not arguing against any of that, he paused. But she's a person. She's not a symbol. She's not a cautionary tale. She's a 29-year-old woman who did something terrible and is now at the exact moment where she either becomes someone who learned something or someone who just survived something. And you care which one it is, Calvin said. I care which one it is, Daniel confirmed. Even after what she did, especially after what she did, Daniel said. Because I've spent 4 years learning that the person who comes out of a terrible moment isn't decided by the moment. It's decided by every choice you make after it. Calvin was quiet for a long time. I genuinely don't know how you are the way you are, he said finally. I'm not anything special, Daniel said. I'm just trying to be accurate. Man, Calvin said, that's exactly it. That's exactly what you are. You're accurate. That afternoon, Daniel received an email. It was from a personal address he didn't recognize. The subject line said only, I don't expect you to respond to this. He almost didn't open it. He opened it. It was from Victoria Lane. He read it standing at his kitchen counter, while Olivia was in her room doing homework. He read it once, quickly. The way you read something, when you're not sure whether you can afford to feel the full weight of it. Then he sat down and read it again slowly. She had written it like someone writing with both hands, one hand trying to reach him, and one hand holding herself back from the impulse to ask for more than she had earned. It was honest, in the way that people are honest when they have stopped trying to manage the impression they make. She wrote about what she had admitted to Sandra in the hotel room. About the fear, about the authority, about the specific moment when she understood what the word afraid really meant when applied to herself. She wrote, "I have been in aviation for 7 years, and I have worked very hard to become someone who cannot be rattled. I thought that was strength. I understand now that what I called strength was a locked room. You rattled the door just by existing calmly, and I responded to that like it was an attack. That is not your fault. That is mine. I'm going to spend a long time working out how it got that way." She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask for anything. She wrote near the end, "Your daughter said you can't take back what you do, but you can change what you do next. I've written that line on a piece of paper and put it somewhere I'll see it every morning. I'm going to try to deserve the truth of it." She signed it with her full name. Daniel sat at the kitchen counter for a long time. Then he did something he had not planned to do. He wrote back. He wrote, "Ms. Lane, thank you for this. You didn't have to write it, and I know what it cost you to be this accurate about yourself. That kind of honesty is not easy, and it's not comfortable, and it's the beginning of something, not the end. What you do with it is yours to decide. I hope you decide towards something that makes you better. My daughter's words belong to you now. Use them well." He sent it. He sat back. He felt not lighter exactly, but more complete. The way you feel when you've carried all the pieces of a thing to the same place and set them down together. It was not forgiveness as a transaction. It was not erasure. It was something more honest than both of those, the acknowledgement of two people who had been in a situation that was larger than either of them, and who had each come out of it carrying something they hadn't walked in with. He heard Olivia's door open. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her school clothes and socks, her homework folder under her arm, looking at him with the evaluating eyes. "You wrote something," she said. "I can tell because you look like you just put something down." "I wrote an email," he said. "To the Seattle job?" "No, to the flight attendant." She was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" "I told her I hoped she used your words well." Olivia considered this. She came to the counter and put her homework folder down and looked at him seriously. "Do you think she will?" she said. "I don't know," he said. "I think she wants to. Wanting to is good," Olivia said. "It's a start," he said. She nodded satisfied. "Then did you call the Seattle job?" "I'm calling this afternoon." "Okay," she said. "I'm going to finish my homework before you do. Can you make the pasta thing for dinner? The one with the sauce that takes a long time?" "The sauce that takes 2 hours, you mean. It's worth it," she said. "You just want the sauce," he said. "I want the sauce," she confirmed, and went back to her room. He looked at the sent email on his screen. He closed the laptop. He picked up his phone and opened his contacts and found the number for James Whitfield. He called. Whitfield answered on the second ring. "I'm calling to say yes," Daniel said. A pause. Brief. The pause of a man who had expected this call but is not going to pretend that receiving it doesn't matter. "I'm glad," Whitfield said. "I have conditions," Daniel said. "I expected you would." "Olivia's school enrollment is confirmed before my first day," Daniel said. "My travel schedule is agreed upon in advance on a monthly basis, not a weekly one. And I want a clause in my contract that says my schedule accounts for her school events. Recitals, parent nights, the things that most people treat as negotiable." "They're not negotiable," agreed, Whitfield said. Without hesitation. "All of it?" Daniel said. "All of it," Whitfield said. "Daniel, the whole point of what we built is that those things aren't negotiable. You're not the exception. You're exactly who the program was designed for." Daniel exhaled, not dramatically. Just the specific release of air that happens when a weight you've been holding longer than you realized is no longer entirely yours to carry alone. "Okay," he said. "Then yes, welcome to Pacific Air Group," Whitfield said. "Thank you," Daniel said. "For what Hayes told you?" "For the card, for the coffee. Thank Hayes," Whitfield said. He's the one who called me from a cockpit in the middle of an active situation. Because he said he'd just met someone he couldn't afford to let walk off that plane without making sure the world knew about. Daniel was quiet. Call him, Whitfield said. He'd want to know you said yes. Daniel called Hayes. Hayes answered, after 4 rings, with the particular quality of a man who has been expecting a call and has been patiently not checking his phone while he waited for it. Mr. Brooks, Hayes said. Captain, Daniel said, I took the job. A beat. Good, Hayes said. And his voice in that one word contained everything that one word can contain when it's spoken by a man who has been in this world long enough to understand what it means when something that should have happened finally does. I wanted to thank you, Daniel said. You don't need to thank me, Hayes said. I gave a card to a man I thought deserved a door. You opened it yourself. Still, Daniel said, thank you. How's Olivia? Hayes said. She wants pasta for dinner. The kind with the sauce that takes 2 hours. Hayes laughed. The real kind. Bernie the cloud dog would approve, he said. I'll tell her you said so, Daniel said. They said goodbye the way men say goodbye when they know they will not be strangers after this, not with finality, but with the specific quality of a conversation that is pausing rather than ending. The kind of goodbye that means. The next chapter of this story is one I'm interested to see. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in October, Daniel Brooks walked into the Pacific Air Group Safety Division offices in Seattle for his first official day of work. He was 38 years old. He was a single father. He was a man who had lost his wife and rebuilt his life with his hands and his presence, and the specific daily discipline of choosing his daughter over everything else. He was also a man who had spent 11 years becoming extraordinarily good at something, and who had spent 4 years carrying that expertise quietly, in a ground-level job, never asking anyone to know about it. He was done being quiet about it, not for the video. Not for the 14 million views which had climbed to 19 million before the news cycle moved on, and left the story in the category of things that changed a few people profoundly, and many people briefly, and that remains in the memory of Flight 728's 47 passengers. The morning they were on an airplane with a man they had misunderstood and had been given the rare and uncomfortable gift of discovering it. He was done being quiet about it for Olivia, because she was 8 years old and she was watching. She was always watching, and the lesson he wanted her to carry, not the one from the slap, not the one from the video, not the one from the hashtag on the t-shirt she would find out. About eventually the lesson he wanted her to carry was the one she was going to learn from watching him go to work every day at a job that was hard and important and worth doing, and come home every evening to eat dinner with her and ask about her homework, and show up for the recitals and the parent nights, and the things that most people treated as negotiable. That was the lesson, that you could be both, that you didn't have to choose between being excellent at your work and being present for the people you loved. That the choice itself was the lie, and that the man who loved you enough to refuse the lie was the man worth watching. He walked through the doors of the Pacific Air Group Safety Division, and he shook hands with the people who would become his colleagues. And he sat down at a desk that had his name on a temporary placard. And he opened a file on his computer that contained the first safety evaluation assignment of his new role. He looked at it. He thought, fix the problem in front of you. He got to work. That evening, Olivia asked him how his first day was. He said, it was good. It was really good. She looked at him with those eyes. The evaluating ones, the ones that were her mother's and her grandmother's, and entirely her own. You're walking light again, she said. Yeah, he said. I am, she nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. Bernie, the cloud dog, had a new friend now, a small cloud cat that Olivia had named after one of her new Seattle classmates. The sketchpad had 7 pages filled. She was working on the 8th. He watched her draw for a moment in the particular, uncomplicated light of a Tuesday evening in their new apartment in their new city, and he thought about a 47-second video, and a check valve flutter, and a captain who called a colleague from a cockpit, and a program overview on a coffee shop table, and an email that had been worth writing, and a job that was worth saying yes to. He thought about a slap that had started something it was never meant to start. He thought about his daughter, who had watched all of it, and had taken the right things from it, and had given him, in her 8-year-old accuracy, the words he needed to move through it. Be the thing that fixes it. He had been, he was, he always would be. That was the man Daniel Brooks had decided to be, on an airplane at 32,000 feet, in the 2 seconds after the world tried to reduce him to something smaller than he was. He had refused, quietly, without performance, without the need for anyone watching to understand what they were seeing. He had simply refused, and that refusal, that single quiet, absolute refusal, had turned out to be the loudest thing he ever did.